some of us, for some of us, we're now in summer, and for some of us, we're in some other season. Depends where you are. I think most of us, it's summer right now, especially in India. How warm is it in Vrindavan, Kalyani Radha?
Hare Krishna, Guru Maharaj. Very hot because now it's June, very hot in Vrindavan. But we're still serving, doing with Harinam Sankirtana every morning around Pare ground. And evening as well.
Well, that's good. And Delhi must be nice and warm too, isn't that right? Nityaseva Devidasi?
Yeah, it's very hot. I'm even sweating now.
And even here in Europe, it's warm. And Russia?
Today is very hot.
And Mayapur is nice and cool? No, I'm sure it's warm too. And now today I'm going to read from Bhagavad Gita as it is, chapter 9, Most Confidential Knowledge, text number 1. Shri Bhagavan Uvacha, idam tu te guyatamam, pravaksham anushuyave, jnanam vijnana sahitam, yet gyatva moksha se shubhat. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami 20.06.2021. Supreme Personality of Godhead said, my dear Arjuna, because you are never envious of me, I shall impart to you this most confidential knowledge and realization, knowing which you shall be relieved of the miseries of material existence. Purport. As a devotee hears more and more about the Supreme Lord, he becomes enlightened. This hearing process is recommended in the Srimad Bhagavatam. The messages of the Supreme Personality of Godhead are full of potency, and these potencies can be realized. Topics regarding the Supreme Godhead are discussed amongst devotees. This cannot be achieved by the association of mental speculators or academic scholars for his realized knowledge. The devotees are constantly engaged in the Supreme Lord's service. The Lord understands mentality and sincerity of a particular living entity who is engaged in Krishna consciousness and gives him the intelligence to understand the science of Krishna and the association of devotees. Discussion of Krishna is very potent, and if a fortunate person has such association and tries to assimilate the knowledge, then he will surely make advancement towards spiritual realization. Lord Krishna, in order to encourage Arjuna to higher and higher elevation in his potent service, describes in this 9th chapter matters more confidential than any he has discussed already disclosed. The very beginning of Bhagavad Gita, the 1st chapter, is more or less an introduction to the rest of the book. And the 2nd and 3rd chapters, the spiritual knowledge described is called confidential. Topics discussed in the 7th and 8th chapters are specifically related to devotional service. Because they bring enlightenment in Krishna consciousness, they are called more confidential. For the matters which are described in the 9th chapter deal with unalloyed pure devotion. Therefore, this is called the most confidential. One who is situated in the most confidential knowledge of Krishna is naturally transcendental. He therefore has no material pangs, although he is in the material world. In the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, it is said that although one who has a sincere desire to render loving service to the Supreme Lord, situated in the conditioned state, everyone please mute, of material existence, is to be considered liberated. Similarly, we shall find in the Bhagavad Gita, 10th chapter, that anyone who's engaged in that way is the liberated person. Now, this first verse has specific significance. The word idam jnanam, this knowledge, refers to pure devotional service, which consists of 9 different activities: hearing, chanting, remembering, serving, worshiping, praying, obeying, maintaining friendship, and surrendering everything. By the practice of these 9 elements to devotional service, one is elevated to spiritual consciousness, Krishna consciousness. When one's heart is thus cleared of material contamination, one can understand the science of Krishna. Similarly, to understand the living entity is not material is not sufficient. That may be the beginning of spiritual realization. But one should recognize the difference between activities of the body and the spiritual activities of one who understands that he is not the body. In the 7th chapter, we have already discussed the opulent potency of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, his different energies, the inferior and superior natures, and all this material manifestation. Now in chapter 9, the glories of the Lord will be delineated. The word anusuyave in this verse is also very significant. Generally, the commentators, even if they are highly scholarly, are all envious of Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Even the most erudite scholars write on Bhagavad Gita very inaccurately. Because they're envious of Krishna, the commentaries are useless. The commentaries given by the devotees of the Lord are bona fide. No one can explain Bhagavad Gita or give perfect knowledge of Krishna if he is envious. One who criticizes the character of Krishna without knowing him is a fool. So such commentaries should be very carefully avoided. One who understands that Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the pure and transcendental personality, these chapters will be very beneficial. So the text again, Shri Bhagavan Vacha, idam tu te guyatamam, pravaksham anushuyave, jnanam jnana sahitam, yajgat moksha se shubhat. Supreme Personality of Godhead said, my dear Arjuna, because you are never envious of me, I shall impart to you this most confidential knowledge and realization, knowing which you shall be relieved of the miseries of material existence. Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutaya Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swami Namane Namaste Saraswatam Deve Gauravani Pacharane Nirvishesha Shnivadi Paskadhyade Sadarane. It is said that there are 10 billion verses in the Vedas. And of all those 10 billion verses, the Bhagavad Gita is a summary, 900 verses. And of the, 700 verses in the Bhagavad Gita. And of the 700 verses, the most significant verses are in this 9th chapter. And here we have the beginning of the 9th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, which is the summary of 10 billion verses in the Vedas. And it begins with Shri Bhagavan Vacha. Now, we have to consider that if we simply accept Krishna as the Supreme Personality of Godhead, as Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita, Janma Karma Chame Divyam, if we understand the nature of Krishna's activities and his appearance, then we don't have to take birth again in the material world. But the word uses tatvadaha. Tat means that. So that indicates something which is perceivable by us. And va means a category of things that we can actually perceive and experience. There are many theories about God. God may be an old man. God may be love. God may be something. But these things are not directly perceived by anyone. They're simply conceptions. But to actually know Krishna, we have to experience him. That's called Krishna's tattva. Now, experiencing him with our present senses will not be possible, at least not completely. Therefore, Krishna says that jivado, self-realized atakshi Krishna namade na bravet grayam indriya. Grayam indriya means we have to understand that presently our senses are not very sharp. We cannot experience many things in conditioned life. Our senses are imperfect. We commit mistakes. Even big personalities, whether it be Churchill or Adolf Hitler or any other supposedly very prominent person, they all committed mistakes. So we have imperfect senses, we commit mistakes. We're subject to illusion. And the first illusion that we're subject to is the fact that we think we're this body, but actually we have nothing to do with this body any more than we have to do with, for instance, a tree or a building. Now, if someone believes that he's a tree, for instance, we may dream at night that I'm a tree, and you wake up rather stiff, and everyone's wondering what's the problem? Well, I can't move. Could you throw some water on my feet? I'm quite thirsty. Then people will think that you're crazy. You're in a deluded state. But at night when we were dreaming and we thought we were a tree, it seemed completely rational and logical that I'm a tree. As a matter of fact, we would prefer people to pour water in our dream on our feet than on our leaves and branches. When we wake up, now we're not thinking we're a tree, we're thinking we're this body. But actually, we're no more this body than we were the tree in our dream last night. So this is called illusion. And the other thing is we have a tendency to cheat. Although an intelligent person can understand that he's an illusion, that he has imperfect senses, and that he commits mistakes, still people are claiming they actually have knowledge. So this is called cheating. When Prabhupada was Prabhupada was in Detroit talking to one professor. I believe the professor is a professor of Indology. So he came to Prabhupada and said, Swamiji, I'm a professor of Indology, that is the study of Indian philosophy. Can you tell me what Hinduism means? So Prabhupada looked at Swarup Damodar, who was a PhD candidate at the time, and said, Swarup Damodar, here is a professor of Indology, Hinduism. And he's asking me, what does Hinduism mean? So Prabhupada asked Swarup Damodar, what would you call this? And Swarup Damodar said, he's a cheater, Prabhupada, he's a cheater. He's claiming he's a professor of Indology, yet he doesn't even know what Hinduism means. So similarly, people are claiming they know so much, but actually they don't know anything if they don't even begin to understand that they're not the body. With imperfect senses, with a tendency to make mistakes, with being an illusion, that if I claim I have perfect knowledge, then I'm simply cheating. But here we have Shri Bhagavan Uvacha, Krishna is saying, Krishna is going to speak to us. So in Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says, Vedaham samatitani vartmanani cha Arjuna. Krishna says, I know everything that's happened in the past. Everything that's happening right now in the present, and I know everything that's going to happen in the future. So this is called perfect knowledge. Now, we may not know, as a matter of fact, except for Krishna, who actually knows what happened, everything that happened in the past. Every atom in the ocean, in our tiny little planet, Krishna knows exactly where that atom was since time immemorial, that energy. What to speak in the countless universes. So this is beyond our tiny brains to understand how anyone can know everything in the past, present, and future. But Krishna claims that. Now, that's why he's Bhagavan. Bhagavan has certain opulences, and one of them is that he has all knowledge. Now, unless he has all knowledge, what is the value of reading Bhagavad Gita? The Bhagavad Gita becomes simply a treatise, as Prabhupada said, of speculation. Now, if Krishna does know the past, present, future, then the Bhagavad Gita becomes a very valuable book. Now, how do we develop faith that Krishna actually knows past, present, and future? Well, for one thing, we can see whether his knowledge is perfect, whether it applies to past, present, and future. Now, Krishna is not speaking about who's going to win the next presidential election in America. Probably most of us don't really care. But Krishna is not trying to prove his knowing the past, present, and future by such an explanation. After all, he's only giving us 700 verses, and it would fill up, the 700 verses would be filled up quite rapidly if Krishna simply made some predictions which wouldn't make any difference to us. What he does say is that everyone has a body that's changing. Krishna spoke Bhagavad Gita 5,000 years ago, and at that time, everyone's body was changing. And it just so happens right now, I'm speaking Bhagavad Gita from the Bhagavad Gita, and I'm repeating the fact that Krishna said everyone's body is changing. Now, what Krishna said 5,000 years ago is just as relevant right now at this moment, because everyone's body is changing everywhere in all the universes. And I can predict that in 5,000 years from now, on the basis of Bhagavad Gita, everyone's body will still be changing. So this is actually science. It applies to the past, it applies to the present, and applies to the future. Similarly, Krishna gives us some understanding of how powerful he is, because in Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says, Gam avisha chabhutani daryaham aham ojasa, that I enter into the planets, and by my energy, they stay in orbit. Now, anyone can look up in the sky, if it's not smoggy or cloudy at night, and see there's so many planets in this universe, and they're not colliding with each other. Similarly, the sun's rising at a certain time, and the sun is setting at a certain time. Now, the sun, which is so powerful, is exactly in an orbit. And according to Lord Brahma, the person who's created that orbit that the sun is exactly in is Krishna, Govinda. Now, that's perceivable by us. The scientists, if they put up a little satellite or a Sputnik, it may remain there for some years, and eventually it falls down. Sometimes they even get lost. So this tiny little Sputnik or a satellite made by a tiny little scientist who thinks that they become God by doing it, they cannot perceive that in the universe, there's a huge satellite or Sputnik called the sun, giving off unlimited heat and light since time immemorial. And yet they take so much credit for their small accomplishment, but they give no credit to the big satellite producer or Sputnik producer, Krishna. In other words, Tattvadaha, we can perceive with our own senses, although they may be limited, the existence of ourselves, the existence of the Supreme Self, and the existence of Krishna. We may not perfectly perceive it, but with the use of our intelligence, we can gradually develop faith that Krishna does exist. He explains in Bhagavad Gita who he is, and we can examine the philosophy of Bhagavad Gita and see whether or not the knowledge is perfect, whether it's describing our own experience. Now, in the material world, everyone is very busy trying to get the maximum amount of happiness out of this material existence. But Krishna says, I'm going to give you knowledge, Guya Guyatama, the best of all knowledge. Basically speaking, everyone wants only three things. We want knowledge of how to become as happy as possible for as long as possible. So that's considered knowledge. But now Krishna is going to give us confidential knowledge, the most confidential knowledge. As Prabhupada explains here, that Krishna has already given us knowledge in the second chapter of Bhagavad Gita, where he tells us that we're not this body. This is real knowledge. If one believes that he's the body, then he must be under the influence of ignorance. Just like right now, we have some knowledge, but also all of us, we probably have to admit that we're also under the influence of the illusory energy of Krishna to one degree or another. So although we can perceive our eternal existence with our intelligence, and perhaps we can even feel it, but still being under the influence of ignorance, we don't clearly perceive our actual reality, what to speak of our identity, spiritual identity. So this knowledge is called confidential. Because although we can go and speak to people about this knowledge that you're not this body, still many people want to understand. And even if they understand it, they don't take it very seriously. Just like in the spiritual world, everyone knows, well, even in Vrindavan, we find that the gopis, or even Nanda Maharaj and Jasoda Mai, they understand that Krishna is God, but they don't take it very seriously. The cowherd boys treat him just like an ordinary friend, although they know sometimes when he swallows a forest fire, they know that Krishna must be something special. But they don't take it seriously. Similarly, we know we're not this body, but oftentimes we don't take it very seriously. We're so much caught up in our materialistic life that being an eternal soul doesn't make much difference to us. So confidential knowledge is such that even if we tell it to people, they don't take it very easily. They don't accept it very easily. Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami, in his Chaitanya Charitamrita, he's explained a very, very confidential pastimes of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Even the Vedas didn't know Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's pastimes. How he sometimes in his ecstasy, his limbs would separate from his body. And sometimes in his ecstasy, his separation from Krishna, the limbs of his body would draw inside his body and he looked like a yellow pumpkin. The extent of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's exhibition of Mahabhava was unknown even by the Vedas. So Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami was a little bit reluctant to reveal such confidential knowledge in the Chaitanya Charitamrita. But he said that there's no problem, because people who are like hogs and dogs, even when you tell them these things, they won't believe them anyhow. It won't make any difference. One time I was distributing books at the University of Texas in Austin, Texas. And I met one man and I was showing him the book, especially the picture of the changing bodies. How we had a little baby body, we had a 15-year-old body, and now we have this body. So I asked the man, which body do you have? And the man pointed to one picture, young body, and he said, that's my body. And then he thought for a moment, he said, yeah, that's right. I've had so many bodies and they're changing, but I'm still the same person. Actually, I'm eternal. So he was quite enthusiastic when he said that. So I said, great. And he said, take the book and give a donation. But he handed me the book back and said, no, it's all right. I don't need your book. Then he shook my hand and said, oh, thank you very much. I'm so happy to hear I'm eternal. And then he left. So even there's some knowledge, confidential knowledge, still people can't really understand it very easily unless they take to the path of devotional service. Similarly, more confidential knowledge is knowledge of the super soul. The fact that God is not some impersonal energy situated far away from us, or that God is an old man sitting on a throne, condemning people to death and awarding some people harps and horns to play when they get into the mood. That God is actually a person who's in our heart. Not only is he in our heart, but he's actively engaged with us eternally. God is not some person far away in some spiritual world or on some cloud. God is actually in our heart, giving us remembrance, knowledge, and forgetfulness. That whatever we can remember right now is all by the grace of Krishna. And whatever we don't remember is also by the grace of Krishna. There are many things that would be better that we don't remember. If we remembered everything about our past, present, future, we'd be quite horrified. Could you imagine if you could remember your past life and you were a fly and your life ended in not such a pleasant way by one frog sticking out his tongue, and then you were his meal that day? I mean, what would you think? What kind of, how would that memory help you progress in devotional life? So by Krishna's mercy, we can't remember everything that's happened to us in the past, because Krishna only helps us remember some things that are helpful for our present devotional service. Similarly, knowledge, Krishna supplies us knowledge so we can understand this philosophy if we want to. And those who do not want to understand Krishna's philosophy, then Krishna helps them forget him. Therefore, the word here is anusuyave. Most people are envious of Krishna. They're not only envious of Krishna, but they're also envious of Krishna's expansions. There's a Ramayan. There are many Ramayans, the stories of Lord Ramachandra. And there's a Ramayan for those in the mode of ignorance. And in that Ramayan, for those in the mode of ignorance, there's the pastimes of Lord Ramachandra fighting against Ravana. The only difference is, because this Ramayan is for those in the mode of ignorance, therefore in that Ramayan, Ravana is the hero. He was actually a nice person. He did so much austerity. he simply fell in love with Sita. He was madly in love with her. He couldn't help himself. But Ramachandra was so envious, he came and he killed him when he wasn't looking, of course. So, what to speak of being envious of Krishna? Even Krishna's expansions, demons are envious of. And what to speak of Krishna? Even his part and parcels, people are envious of. If someone has a little bit more knowledge than we have, if someone has some more wealth than we have, if someone has some more strength than we have, if someone has some more fame than we have, if someone has some more strength than we have, or renunciation, then we become envious of them. Why this person has so much money, why this person has so much fame. So what to speak, if we are envious of people who have a very small amount of these opulences in comparison to Krishna, how much more so will people become envious of Krishna when they hear about his glories? It's all right to understand that we're eternal, but when we hear about how Krishna is directing the wanderings of all living entities as on a machine, that he's in everyone's heart, and that we're eternally 100% dependent on him, naturally people will be, those who are envious, will not be able to understand this. Even Hiranyakashipu, after his brother Hiranyaksha was killed, his family members became very distressed. My baby brother got killed by this animal from the forest. He was quite disturbed by it. Even more disturbed was his relatives. So Hiranyakashipu, in the beginning of the 7th canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam, there's practically a whole chapter dedicated to Hiranyakashipu preaching to his relatives about the eternality of the self, of the soul. So Hiranyakashipu, Ravana, they were Gyanis. They understood that there is a difference between the self and the body, but they're envious of Krishna. They didn't understand that Krishna is in their heart. When Lord Varaha was confronted with Hiranyakashipu, Lord Varaha had killed his brother Hiranyaksha. Lord Varaha didn't know where to hide in the universe because he understood that actually it's not my business to kill Hiranyakashipu. It's actually will be Lord Nrsingadev's business to kill Hiranyakashipu. So I must hide because I don't want to fight with Hiranyakashipu. So he looked all over the universe to try to find some place where he could hide. But there's no place in the universe because Hiranyakashipu at that time was half the size of the universe, and Lord Varaha was also half the size of the universe. So there's very little space left to hide in. So Varaha, Lord Varaha, knowing well the situation, he made himself so small that he entered through the nostril of Hiranyakashipu. He entered into his heart because he knew that Hiranyakashipu, being a demon, the last place he'd look for anything would be in his heart. So the demons, they never try to understand how God is in their heart. If they knew that they were 100% dependent upon Krishna, whatever they could remember, whatever they would forget, and whatever knowledge they have, they definitely go crazy. Of course, they're crazy, but they become even more disturbed than they are. You wouldn't, because they think Krishna is their enemy, and you wouldn't like to find out that you are 100% dependent on your enemy, because everyone has come to the material world to want to think themselves independent of Krishna, free to do anything they want. But that's more confidential knowledge than to understand that Krishna, that we're eternal. But in this chapter, in the 9th chapter, Krishna will explain knowledge which is even more confidential than that, the most confidential, knowledge about himself personally, and the knowledge about pure devotional service. Now, most people are not interested in that because they're not interested in Atma Tattva. As Shukadeva Goswami said in the Srimad Bhagavatam, Shotavyadishu Rajendra Srinam Shanti Sahasrasha Saha Apashatam Atmatattvam Griheshu Grihamedinam. Those who are Grihamedis, Grihamedi means they've made a vow to live in the material world and to try to enjoy it somehow or another. Griha actually means house, and Medisa means that their minds are absorbed in their house, decorating their family members, decorating their house, trying to have a strong society or country. Everything is just meant to build up their material experience here. So they're called Grihamedis or Grihavratas. And there are hundreds and thousands of topics of that they like to hear about. Prabhupada would say that every day around the world, there are big, big newspapers putting out so much information about what's going on in this illusory material energy. And people are very much interested. On Sunday, they buy a newspaper in America. The Sunday newspaper, practically you need it's so heavy, you'd have to be quite strong in order to be able to lift it. And they take it, they spend all Sunday reading about Gramya Katha, who got married today, who died today, who stole what. And by Monday, it would be useless. The only person who would take pleasure in the newspaper would be the dog, especially for the puppies. That would be their bathroom for Monday. So what they took is so seriously on Sunday becomes a place of pleasure for the puppy on Monday. So this is called Grihamedi. They have hundreds and thousands of topics, but about Grihamedi some. But Atma Tattvam they have no interest in. Apashatam Atma Tattvam. They have no information nor any interest in hearing about the eternality of the self, nor the fact that there's a super self. At night, as Shukadeva Goswami said, they're either sleeping or having sex, and during the daytime, they're either making money or spending it. And they think that by doing that, they'll become eternal. Their wife, their children, their pet dog, they'll protect them from death. But they don't see, nor do they want to see, how so many other persons, even more powerful than they are, took shelter in their families, in their societies, to protect them from death, but it didn't work. Therefore, this Hare Krishna movement is actually the opportunity to stop the real problems of life. Janma, Mrityu, Jara, Vyadi, Dukkha, Dosha, Nudarshana. Our real problems are we have to die. Unless we can solve that problem, then all the other problems are insignificant. Hiranyakashipu, he went through 120 years of austerity to stop his death. He didn't try to conquer the universe first, he tried to conquer death. So although he was a demon, he understood that without conquering death, everything else is a waste of time. But Hiranyakashipu didn't know how to conquer death because he was a demon. But those who are devotees, they can find out, as Shukadeva Goswami says, that Tasmat Bharata Sarvatma, Tasmat Bharata Sarvatma, that therefore, O Bharata, Smartavyak Shotitavyas Cha, Kirtayak Siddhatavaya, that if we hear about Krishna, we chant about Krishna, we eventually remember Krishna, that will actually protect us from our problems of death. Shukadeva Goswami was on the bank of the Jamuna, fasting until death. He didn't take help of an Ayurvedic doctor who can give him a cure for snake poison. Nor did he take shelter of any other philosophy. He simply took shelter of Shukadeva Goswami, who spent 7 days and nights talking about Krishna and the philosophy of Krishna consciousness with him. And therefore, at the end, he actually conquered death. So we can also conquer death. And if we conquer death, then naturally there'll be conquering of old age, disease, and having to take birth again. And as it says, both by the rising of the setting of the sun, everyone's duration of life is lost, except for those who actually take shelter of the all-good personality of Godhead. So our philosophy is very simple. That is to take shelter of Krishna through the process of devotional service, and that will solve our real problems. Now, people are not interested in those problems. As Vidyapati says, what are they interested in? Sutta Mita Ramaniya Samaye. They're interested in children, Sutta Mita, friends, Ramani, women. So they want these things. Why? Because they want happiness. And these are the happiness in the material world. It is not that happiness doesn't exist in the material world, but Vidyapati says it's just like a drop of water in the desert. Certainly in the desert, when it's very hot, one will be hankering after water. But if you're in a desert and an ambulance comes to save you, and they take out the bottle of water, they open your mouth, and one drop of water enters into your mouth, and then they say, we've saved him, and then they get into their ambulance and look for another person dying in the desert. Certainly one drop of water is a drop of water, but it's insignificant compared to what's the actual necessity. So actually we want an ocean of happiness. We want an ocean of knowledge of how to achieve that happiness. We want that happiness to last forever. So undoubtedly there's happiness in the material world, but it's just like compared to one drop in the desert by Vidyapati. Therefore, that happiness is obtained, especially in the association of devotees who are repeating Krishna's message. That the devotees, or Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita, I'm going to tell you this most confidential knowledge to those who are anusuyave, those who are not envious. So in the material world, everyone is envious of Krishna. After all, everyone here is trying to become Krishna to one degree or another. Everyone wants to be the spotlight of others' attention. With a little bit of knowledge, with a little bit of fame, a little bit of wealth, a little bit of beauty, a little bit of renunciation. One wants to be spotlighted and admired by others and appreciated by others. One feels oneself in competition for those who are equally or more beautiful or wealthy or strong than oneself. So how much more so one would become envious of Krishna, who has these opulences unlimitedly. So if everyone's envious of Krishna, then how can we understand this most confidential knowledge? How can anyone understand it in the material world? Therefore, Krishna sends his devotees, because their devotees are more merciful than Krishna is. Karunika, Pikshava Karunika, Surida Sarvadehina. This is Kapila Dev in the third canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam. that the devotees are tolerant, like Lord Nityananda, Gaur Nitai, and the Panchatattva and their associates came here just to deliver not only the sober-minded, the dhira, but also the adhira. Dhira, dhira, janat, kriyo, priyakaro. That the six Goswamis, they engage in the Sankirtan movement, dancing and chanting, and they were dear not only to the ruffians, the persons who are not sober, but or to the persons who are sober, the dhira, self-control, but they were also dear to the ruffians, like Jagai and Madhai. They were so merciful. They were tolerant. Lord Nityananda was struck on the head with a piece of a pot. He was bleeding, but still he requested Jagai Madhai to surrender and take shelter of the holy name, chant Hare Krishna, because he tolerated, because he's the most merciful. That Gaur Nitai, that they're the essence of all the incarnations. Parama Karuna, Pahu Dvijana, Nitai Gaurachandra. There's no one more merciful than Gaur Nitai. They're the essence of all the incarnations, and they're the most merciful. So, as much as we can take shelter of Gaur Nitai and their representatives and try to do something on their behalf, we also exhibit mercy. Not only to the dhira, but also to the adhira. If everyone is envious in this material world who is not a pure devotee, then even if we just try to serve those who are not envious, namely Gaur Nitai and their bona fide representatives like Srila Prabhupada, if we try to serve them, then to that extent we'll become non-envious also, and we'll be able to help others become non-envious. Therefore, our process is quite simple. We don't have to invent anything. We don't have to speculate on anything. We simply have to distribute the 3 stages of knowledge. Confidential, tell people that they're not their body. If people cannot understand that they're not their body, then there's very little else they'll be able to understand. Perhaps, just like when Prabhupada was talking to Professor Kutaski at the University of Moscow, then at that time he tried to explain to Professor Kutaski the difference between matter and spirit. But Professor Kutaski could not understand what Prabhupada was talking about. Still, Prabhupada gave him one last chance. He talked about creating first-class men in the mode of goodness. But Professor Kutaski, for him, everyone was the same, completely in a mode of ignorance. Therefore, he cannot even understand that aspect of our philosophy. Therefore, Prabhupada asked for a taxi. He realized that there's nothing more I could really tell him. And Professor Kutaski said, sorry, Swamiji, I cannot get you a taxi. So even that much he could not help. Still, we try to explain to people the difference between their body and their self. And by repeating it, we're reminded also that we're eternal spiritual beings. And for those who are more intimately connected with the Hare Krishna movement, who've done some study of Prabhupada's books and some devotional service, then we try to explain to them about how to take shelter of the super soul, how the super soul can help us follow 4 of the principles, chant a certain number of rounds a day, remind us how many rounds we have left, remind us even where we left our bead bag, so we can pick it up. So the super soul, those who are more intimately connected with the Hare Krishna movement, they can take shelter of the super soul who can remember, give us guidance, what's to be done and what's not to be done. And as we become even more intimately connected, then we can find out about Krishna's pastimes in the material world. Often the devotees want to jump to hear about Krishna's pastimes in the internal energy. But if we cannot even understand Krishna's pastimes in this material world, how can we understand Krishna's pastimes in a world way beyond our conception or perception? Therefore, knowledge in the second canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, how Karnadakashai Vishnu, Garbhadakashai Vishnu, Shiradakashai Vishnu are performing their pastimes with us in this material world is also another elevation in our understanding. So we can live here dependent on Krishna. Dadami Buddhi Yogam Tam. And as Krishna sees that we live in a Krishna conscious way in this world, then gradually he'll reveal even knowledge more confidential. Tesham Sadatam Yuktanam Bhajantam Pratipurvakam. Then Tesham Eva Nukam Paratam. Then when Krishna sees that we're really trying to serve him sincerely in this world with the intelligence that he's supplying us in devotional service through Guru, Sadhana, and Shastra, and his help as a super soul within our heart, then gradually he reveals himself in the internal energy. And our hearts become purified of all lust, anger, and greed by the divine ecstasy of Krishna's association. So that's there. We can read Krishna book, we can read Prabhupada's book, Srimad Bhagavatam, but we should learn how to live in the material world without enviousness, which means living here as a humble servant of the servant of the servant of Krishna. And that way we can try to help ourselves to become Krishna conscious, and we can help distribute that knowledge to others. And when Krishna sees that, gradually all the mercy, both of understanding this world in relation to Krishna, and eventually Krishna will reveal the spiritual world within our heart also. So I'll stop there. Thank you. Any questions, comments?
Hare Krishna, Guru Maharaj. Thank you for the lecture. I have a question. In Bhagavad Gita, chapter 10, text 10, that who serve me, I give him knowledge. And how we take knowledge when we serve Krishna, and how change our spiritual practice from sentimentalism and fanatism to spiritual practice based in spiritual knowledge.
Well, in order to follow Krishna's instructions, we have to hear from Krishna or from his representatives. Now, the next thing is how much we take that hearing seriously. That if we take it seriously, then we'll remember what we've heard. And if we don't take it seriously, then it'll just be forgotten. So therefore, in this age, Krishna spoke Bhagavad Gita, but he also had it written down so that we can go back and remember it. Otherwise, it would have been lost in Kali Yuga. We would have forgotten what Krishna said by now. So we can go back and read it again and again and again until we remember something. Now, we remember something in Bhagavad Gita or remember many things in Bhagavad Gita. It may not be very helpful to us unless we can assimilate it, as Prabhupada said in the purport, assimilate the knowledge, see it from different perspectives, so that it becomes clear what it actually means in terms of reality. All of us, we have a different reality because we're living in different situations. So what does it mean that Krishna is the proprietor of everything? Krishna is the enjoyer of everything. Krishna is the friend of everything. May be different from our different circumstances. So we have to assimilate the knowledge so we know how to apply it so that we act as a devotee in all our various circumstances that we may face. Whether we're a brahmachari or grihasta, whether we're a vanaprastha or a sannyasi, these are all different circumstances where we're working, what we're doing. So we have to assimilate this knowledge so that we can maintain our devotional consciousness in any circumstance. Next, besides that, we have to learn how to associate with the devotees in the 6 loving exchanges appropriately. So that also takes assimilation of the philosophy and the knowledge to know how to apply it in the loving exchanges. To those who are more elevated, how to take shelter of the knowledge they've received in the disciple succession, how to cooperate with those in loving exchanges, especially to spread the movement outside the movement and to develop it within the movement, our spiritual loving exchanges, and how to help the innocent people come to a higher platform of devotional commitment and education. So that's called assimilation, to apply practically in our daily lives. And when Krishna sees that, then Dadami Buddhi Yogam Tam, he gives us more and more intelligence, how to become more expert in hearing, how to become more expert in assimilation of that knowledge, how to become more expert in giving up unwanted habits, unwanted desires, how to become more expert in applying that philosophy in our daily lives so that our loving exchanges become more intimate with the devotees and our desire to help the innocent increases also. So when Krishna helps from within, then Krishna consciousness becomes realized knowledge. It becomes more and more part of our existence, our experience, rather than simply something theoretical. Theoretical knowledge is helpful, but it only becomes really solidified and meaningful to us when we apply it seriously by the process of hearing, remembering, assimilating, and applying. Anything else?
Yes, Alexei Богатырь want...
Okay.
Алексей, спрашивайте. Где ваш вопрос?
I can't hear anything.
Алексей, ничего не слышно. Вы не могли бы микрофон включить?
Well,
Да, сейчас слышно.
Он говорит по-русски?
Дорогой Гуру Махарадж, пожалуйста, примите мои поклоны смиренно. Я хотел, как бы сегодняшняя лекция, мне понятно, я хотел просто воспользоваться возможностью попросить благословения на более глубокое изучение книг Шрилы Прабхупады, вот, чтобы у меня был такой жадный вкус к изучению книг, и я вот хочу воспользоваться этой возможностью, попросить вашего благословения, чтобы я глубже изучал книги Шрилы Прабхупады ежедневно. Вот этого мне так не хватает. Вы в свое время дали мне наставление, чтобы я читал книги Шрилы Прабхупады. Вот. И я читаю их, но я хочу их глубже изучать и глубже понимать. Вашей милости. Спасибо.
The question is that he knows that we should read Prabhupada's books because it's very important to do so, but he's not so expert at doing it. So, is that right, Prabhupada? Yes. So the thing to do is, pick up Prabhupada's book, read one line, close the book, see what you can remember. Then open the book, see if you actually remembered something. Then write it down on a piece of paper what you think you remembered, or at least the idea, and then open the book, do it with one line, do it with a paragraph, and that way you'll become expert. Krishna will give you remembrance if you try. Even if you can't remember one line, start with one word. See if you can remember one word you read. If you can't remember one word, try to remember the first letter of the word that you read. And that way you'll pay you'll train yourself to pay more attention to what you're reading. And Krishna will help by giving you more and more memory of what you're reading, because that's what you desire if you do it that way. And then we won't be gloopy anymore. We'll be intelligence. Okay, I think we'll stop there.
Спасибо,
Thank you.
дорогой Гуру Махарадж, мои поклоны, пожалуйста.
Hare Krishna. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Samaveta Bhaktivinoda ki jai. Gaur Premanande.
Thank you very much for lecture.
Спасибо большое. Хари Кришна.
Thank you, Guru Maharaj. Thank you, Guru Maharaj.
Thank you, Guru Maharaj.
Hare Krishna.